Okay, so there is this idea where if you use the new arcanes that come from acolytes, i.e. the Deadhead, the Merciless, the Dexterity arcane, you may or may not be able to forego one of the most baseline fundamental mod that has always existed in all of Warframe's modding history. And that, my friends, is a mod like Serration. Because in this update, there is an idea that is floating around where the use of those arcanes could be a sufficient replacement for those mods, because when you use those mods with the arcanes, the mods themselves are not giving a whole lot of value. Here we are in the simulacrum with Mag Prime. So what we're going to do is we're going to try and demonstrate this idea in action. Now we're going to go up against these pause enemies just for the hell of it. The idea is you use something like a melee weapon and primary dexterity, and you build up your dexterity stacks by killing enemies with your melee weapon. And then in doing so, you now have effectively more damage than you normally would with a Serration. And then of course, we're just going to pair this up with something like Galvanized Scope, Galvanized Chamber. And this is the idea. So that's the idea. Against those corrupted heavy gunners, we could see that our arrows were basically doing one-shots, and the surprising thing is our build doesn't even have Serration. Let's have a look at it. This is the build that we're using without Serration. I have specifically removed Amalgam Serration and placed in its place Prime Shred. So the idea being that when you max out your primary dexterity, you get 360% damage for 20 seconds. Plus 7.5% combo duration, plus 60% holster speed. That's irrelevant. The main thing is that you get the 360% damage. Now, of course, you could argue that you want to double it up with something like Serration, but the idea is that when you double it up with Serration, your Serration is not doing a whole lot. And I guess that generally makes sense when it comes to diminishing multipliers, as it is called in the infographic. Now, outside of that, of course, I am using my Paris Acrocron, so there is a lot of extra crit chance, crit damage, and all that good stuff, along with Point Strike, Vital Sense, Galvanized Scope, of course, giving us even more critical chance, which of course feeds into the amount of damage we can go up against a Corrupted Heavy Gunner, especially when we land all those headshots on those trash mobs. And then, of course, we have Galvanized Chamber as well to give us that extra multi-shot. Of course, that's just going to mean that we'll be pretty easily killing level 165 Corrupted Heavy Gunners, at least in the Simulacrum. But then, of course, in Steel Path, it's a little bit different, but it still kind of works out in the end when using something like this. To me, I feel like this idea does actually have some leg to stand on, but the main concern that I have is the downtime, should you not really keep up your stacks. And more importantly, at the start of every mission, your weapon is pretty bloody weak without something like Serration. If you try and go up against enemies, even in a Simulacrum without your Serration, well, guess what? You've lost a giant chunk of your damage. So you have to rely on something like your melee weapon if you're using primary dexterity. With primary Merciless and, more importantly, primary Deadhead, I feel like this is not a terribly viable way to make things work, because, again, it's that downtime. Yes, there might be some good old-fashioned trash mobs, but at some point, there's a good to fair chance that even trash mobs might not suffice. I'm not 100% sure about that, especially with Merciless, because I don't have a maxed Merciless. But I do know that with Deadhead, because you're aiming for heads, it's going to be a lot more difficult. Because if we have a look at the Simulacrum without actually using our melee weapon, it's kind of like this. If we summon the exact same enemies again, sure, these are level 165 enemies in the Simulacrum, so they're easier. You can obviously kill the butchers and all that jazz, but if you try to go up against your Corrupted Heavy Gunners right from the get-go, guess what? They're not doing a whole lot of damage. Of course, there was a viral and slash proc, so that's lucky, but, generally speaking, they're not going to do a whole lot. until you start landing those kills. So that's the main issue that I have. So that's pretty much it. Let me know what you think about all of this in the comments below. What do you think about something like this? Do you reckon using something like primary dexterity kind of goes against the idea of the melee versus primary secondary weapon buff rebalance in the first place? Let me know in the comments. I personally feel like it's a little bit antithetical to the entire idea of replacing Serration. If, as a direct result, if you're using something like primary dexterity, you have to rely on your melee weapon to land a bunch of kills first before you go ahead and do that. And that is before we also talk about the power of the galvanized mods, specifically well, actually all of them, because they do require kills. So I don't know. There is that downtime, and especially that downtime at the start of the mission, that makes me a bit concerned about this. But if you can make it work, well, at that point, it actually does make sense to not even bother with something like Serration or Hornet Strike. But that's pretty much it. Hope you guys enjoyed this. If you like this video, hit that like button, subscribe for more WarFrame content, and until next time, I'll see you guys later. Thanks for watching. Peace!